The reason this story, the question I want you to ask is not about whales and sharks and all of that. Why is this story in the Bible? And I want to tell you, it's because it reveals some things of God's heart. You can get caught up in the logistics and the rationality and all of that and miss what's on God's heart for you. God gave us His word, and the stories within the Bible can speak to you as clearly as anything. They can cut you right to the heart to bring about a massive change in your life. How do we look at the story of Jonah? There are a few possibilities. Number one is it could be an allegory or a metaphor, a story made up purely for teaching purposes. So an allegory is like something, if you've read The Pilgrim's Progress, it's a story, a poem, or a picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning. It's usually got a moral or a political message. Number two, it could be a folk tale about a character who actually existed, but embellished a little bit for storytelling purposes to drive across a moral teaching. You could look at this as a bit of Jewish satire. And there are a few things within the story that make it like that. And, if you think about the way Jesus used parables, hyperbole, and satire, it makes a story very, very hard-hitting. So think about, he's supposed to go to Nineveh, but he goes in the opposite direction. And Spain at the time was seen as literally the edge of Western civilization. That's as far as you can go. There wasn't anything beyond Spain. So you're supposed to go here, but you set off as far away as you possibly can. Everybody's in sackcloth. The Bible tells us that even the animals were in sackcloth. So from the kings to the cows, there's quite a bit of humor within this. Sitting underneath essentially a vine, a gourd, it's like a butternut or a gem squash, if you know those, and then it failing, and he's so angry. He says, I'm so angry, I could just about lose my life over it. It's very, very exaggerated. And then the third option we can use is we can say it's a literal historical fact backed up by plausible science. We could look at that. So let's just start with, let's just look at a little bit about Nineveh. Nineveh was a real place at the time, and they are still to this day finding the archaeological remains. It was a wealthy city known for its brutality in warfare. It was the capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. They're finding the gates, 15 enormous gates at the different parts on the walls of Nineveh. It was a walled city, a fortress, but it actually took in a metropolis of a few major cities. It was a huge place. We also know that Jonah was a real person. He is mentioned as a prophet in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 14. It speaks about Jonah, the son of Amittai, as being a prophet of Israel from Gath-Hepher, a small community near Nazareth. And in the past, Jonah had a nice job. He always gave the good news as a prophet. And what happened here is that God gave him some bad news. Turn from your evil ways, and I will destroy you. And it's like going to the most brutal nation and telling them that they're going to be destroyed, knowing that your life will be on the line. You can understand why Jonah didn't want to go. Jesus spoke about Jonah as well. In Matthew chapter 12, from verse 40, Jesus says, "For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." They mention as well that Jonah was the son of Amittai. So if Jonah was just an allegorical person or a made-up person, is the detail of who his dad was, is that necessary? So was this a folk tale or embellished? So if Nineveh existed, Jonah existed, he was a prophet, we have the problem of the traveling by whale or big fish. You know, if you can get your head around that he was a real person with a dad, Jesus mentioned him, how? How does somebody get swallowed by a whale? So now, let's think about that a moment. So I've been to the Natural History Museum. There's a blue whale there. You could walk in it. It's the size of 3 buses. It's absolutely enormous. 30 meters in length. It reaches 181 tons. It's the largest animal that you can imagine. However, blue whales are not found in the Mediterranean. Is that a problem? Well, you guys should know that a whale swam up the Thames. Was it in 2006? So, you know, whales can end up where you wouldn't expect them to be. Another option is a humpback whale. That's 13 meters long, not as big as a blue whale, but it's certainly big enough. There you can see the scales. That could swallow someone. The only problem is with the humpback whale, it's got a very small throat. So it's got a huge mouth, and whales kind of take a great big gulp, and they could gulp a person up. There's even a whale that gulped quite recently, somewhere off the coast of Chile. It swallowed a boy and his kayak, and then spat him out when it realized that it made a pretty big mistake. Because it can't swallow. It's got this small throat. They think only a watermelon would fit through a whale's throat. Then you've got the sperm whale, the largest of the toothed whales, and same problem. It's got, it could probably actually swallow you, but it's the walls of its stomach crush the prey. So there's no way that Jonah could have stayed alive for 3 days and 3 nights inside a sperm whale, and it's got 4 stomachs, and its gastric juices, you'd probably be okay from those, but you'd be crushed. What about a shark? Sharks have got a slower metabolism, and a human body could last 3 days without deterioration. So let's say he was swallowed by a shark, maybe a whale shark or a great white, and he wasn't crushed or dissolved by gastric juices, but how did he breathe? How? Unless he had scuba diving equipment, he could not have breathed. And then, what shape was he in after 3 days of not breathing to go and preach? I just want to tell you, preaching is not as easy as it looks. I know you look at me preaching and think, Mel makes it look easy. It isn't, it's hard. And if I'd spent 3 days inside a great white shark, I don't think I'd be here this morning having a little preach. So I just want to encourage you. You know, I studied at Spurgeon's, and I did level 6 in theological studies, and it was on the book of Revelation, and they gave me a reading list. So I read the book, and it said one thing, and I thought, oh, that's impressive. The next book on the reading list was by someone, both people who'd written these books had studied their whole lives. They just studied one aspect of Revelation and written these tomes, and they contradicted each other. So do you know what? I didn't want to ever get too hung up after that, because people far cleverer than me could spend 40 years studying something and reach a conclusion that is contradicted by somebody who is just as clever. How much time do you want to invest in studying whether you could survive? I mean, some of you are losing the will to live just because I'm going through all my whales, right? But does that mean that Jonah the story's got nothing to teach us? Is that what I'm saying? Now, I just think we need to ask the right questions. You know, Jonah is a man with a popular message. He loves his job, giving good news, and then God asks him to take bad news. And, you know, we see that Jonah develops an attitude. I mean, Ari did a beautiful job. She sat on the little chair with her hat. She looked grumpy. And we see that Jonah is more concerned about his vine than an entire nation of people. And, you know, he's got a bit of attitude. And I just think, have you ever thought about yourself that maybe you're having a bit of attitude? And that maybe you needed to change your attitude. Have you ever had a bit of an attitude with God? You know, we're told in the story about an entire nation repenting. And I actually find that more hard to believe than living in a whale or a shark for 3 days. Can you imagine just even going to London? Take yourself off to London, walk to Trafalgar Square. You say, listen, turn from your evil ways. God doesn't like what you're doing. And then King Charles and Camilla order themselves some burlap. And the next thing, they're walking around in sackcloth alongside the Prime Minister and everybody who lives in London. I'm not even talking about the whole United Kingdom, just talking about London. That's even more dramatic than believing in a big fish. But then, on the other hand, just to give you the Spurgeon's experience, have you heard about the Welsh revival? What happened there, in 1904 to 1905, there was a Christian revival in Wales. And it was the most dramatic in terms of its effect on the population, and it triggered revivals in several other countries. It kept the churches of Wales filled for years to come. And the Great Awakening swept the rest of Britain, Scandinavia, parts of Europe, North America, the mission fields of the India, Africa, and Latin America. Welsh revival. So it can happen. Do you know, the reason this story, the question I want you to ask is not about whales and sharks and all of that. Why is this story in the Bible? And I want to tell you, it's because it reveals some things of God's heart. You can get caught up in the logistics and the rationality and all of that and miss what's on God's heart for you. You know, God gave us his word, and the stories within the Bible can speak to you as clearly as anything. They can cut you right to the heart to bring about a massive change in your life. You know, I don't think it's a deal breaker if you believe in Jonah as a literal person, that God literally made that fish swallow him and he was able to breathe, or that he died within the fish and came back to life again. That is not a deal breaker. If you want to believe that Jonah was as real as the Good Samaritan or the Good Shepherd, the story is equally powerful if you look at what God wants to say to you about the story. And I wonder if you are interested in what I said to my dad when he said that he couldn't believe in Jonah. After I'd congratulated him on knowing more about the Bible than I'd given credit for, I said to him, Dad, that's not a deal breaker. What you need to spend the rest of your life focusing on is Jesus. Jesus, the Son of God, who walked our earth, who died and was raised from death to change lives until eternity.